In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into 2024 Tacoma pricing, and then we're going to talk about how that pricing and how the specifications stack up against the competition. If you haven't already watched my first drive video on the new Tacoma, be sure and check that out at the end of this video. There's going to be a link at the end. Without further ado, let's just dive right into the pricing chart. You'll notice this is pretty long and pretty complete, but it doesn't contain the new models that we don't know the pricing on yet. And that's going to be the new Hybrid Max version of the TRD Pro and, of course, the all-new Trail Hunter trim. Those are sort of two different maximum off-roading trims, and those are only going to be available with the Hybrid Max drivetrain. So those are going to be on sale in the spring, and unfortunately, we don't have any pricing detail on those Hybrid Max systems yet. Toyota has also not told us how much the options and packages are going to be on the new Tacoma, but we do have all of the base pricing for the various trims. The trims you see on your screen are the base versions of these particular configurations. Most of the four-wheel drive options here are going to be $3,200 on top of the two-wheel drive option, unless four-wheel drive is standard. So for instance, if we're taking a look at this list, you'll notice that the only way to get the manual transmission is with four-wheel drive. It's also only available on the double cab with the short bed. That is somewhat unfortunate. If you wanted a base SR with a 6-foot bed and a manual transmission, that's just not on offer. Also, all of the TRD off-road trims, as well as the limited trim, are going to come four-wheel drive only. The four-wheel drive system in the limited trim currently is not the new full-time four-wheel drive system that we will find in the hybrid model, because the hybrid model is going to be available on certain other trims of Tacoma in the future. At the beginning, it looks like it's just going to be TRD Pro, and it's going to be the new Trail Hunter trim. Then it's going to be offered optionally in the limited trim, and we're not too sure how that's going to expand from that point on. $3,200 for four-wheel drive may strike some of you as a little bit expensive, but when I reviewed the competition, it actually is pretty similar to most of the competitors. But before we get to that, I should point out that the TRD Pre-Runner trim is not available with four-wheel drive. That is two-wheel drive only. It's also extra cab only. So it's basically a way to get the extra cab with a few more features on the inside, but not really focused on someone that wants to go further off the beaten path. It's still more of a work truck focus. And that's perhaps the most important thing to know about the extra cab is that there are no tiny seats hidden back there. This is a two-door, two-seat truck only. It does have a slightly larger cab versus a regular cab, I guess. That's why it's an extra cab. But there are no small doors back there, no small seats back there. It is just storage. A bit more of a bummer, at least for me, is that there's also no bench seat in the extra cab. So really, it is two seats only. There's no place to put a third passenger. Let's talk about how the Tacoma stacks up against the competition dimensionally. You'll notice on this chart that only the Tacoma and the Frontier are available in two-door and four-door formats, and they're the only ones that offer an optional long bed. That definitely puts them in a different category size-wise than Colorado, Canyon, Ranger, etc. On this chart, Colorado and Canyon, we're basically calling them the same thing, by the way. They have the same exterior dimensions, and although there are some minor variances as far as the engine lineup and what becomes standard wear, they're basically the same truck. In this segment, by far the most popular format of pickup truck is four-door short cab, and that's why the other manufacturers didn't bother to make anything else. Nissan really wants a piece of Toyota's pie, and that's why they're trying to chase them with some of the other different trims and different formats of the Frontier. And customers are definitely going to benefit, especially if you want a V6 engine. So you could get a short cab Frontier, or you could get a four-door cab Frontier with the big bed, and all of them are going to have a standard 310 horsepower naturally aspirated V6 engine. If you're not a fan of the all-turbo direction at Toyota, you might want to take a look at the Frontier. It's probably going to be the closest thing to the Tacoma with a regular V6 under the hood. Yes, you could take a look at the Gladiator, or you could take a look at the Ridgeline, but the important thing to remember is that those trucks aren't exactly the same thing as a Tacoma. The Gladiator is pretty expensive. It also has doors and a roof that comes off. The Ridgeline is a unibody truck, so it's basically a Honda Pilot with a pickup truck bed in the back. And there's certainly pros and cons for both of these things. The other thing you should know is that there are a few different formats and different tunes of the engines available on the Colorado and on the Ranger. The Ranger offers a 2.7-liter turbo in the middle, and on this chart, we're simply talking about the base engine and the most powerful engine in the lineup. Let's take a closer look at the Nissan Frontier now. As I said, every model has a 3.8-liter V6. This is a relatively new engine design for Nissan, although it's based on some prior generations of their V6 engine. The interesting twist here is that it uses a 9-speed automatic transmission standard in every model, so you get one extra gear versus the Tacoma, and I do like the way the 9-speed automatic transmission shifts. The design is by Mercedes. It's built by Nissan, by all appearances, but we don't know what the reliability history will be on this transmission. The Mercedes 9-speed automatic transmission has not been the best in the luxury segment. Hopefully there have been some changes on the Nissan side of things. I have no reason to believe otherwise, but we don't have any track record for this 9-speed automatic transmission. And the 8-speed that the Tacoma uses has been used in a wide variety of Toyotas and Lexuses for a while, so it's a pretty proven transmission design. The V6 gives you notably more power than you'll find in the Tacoma, 310 horsepower, but 281 pound-feet of torque, so actually a little bit less torque than you'll find in some of the competition. The extra gears, though, might compensate for that for some folks. It is going to be less expensive, especially when you consider the fact that there are going to be more deals going on the Nissan dealer lot. A King Cab trim in base format is $29,570. That's about $1,930 less expensive than the base version of the Tacoma. The destination charge is essentially the same, and the cost to go 4x4 is essentially the same as well. So a King Cab 4x4 is $32,770. If you want a crew cab, then the gulf starts to widen. Crew cab versus crew cab, the Tacoma is going to be about $2,600 more expensive. And if you want a crew cab with four-wheel drive, it's even more expensive than that. For some reason, it's nearly $4,000 more for the Toyota. The extra cost of the Tacoma is going to continue all the way up to the top, at least the top-end line that we know now. The top-end Pro 4X Frontier is going to be about $3,600 less expensive than a TRD off-road. Now, features and functions-wise, the Tacoma feels much more modern than the Frontier, and the coil suspension definitely is going to make a difference as far as on-road driving dynamics. Only the base versions of the Tacoma get leaf springs. The rest of them use coil springs front and rear, and it does make a big difference when it comes to the driving nature of the truck. The Frontier comes across as sort of a cheap and cheerful truck. It's definitely basic in the base forms. The buttons and things like that, they come across as maybe a little bit old school here and there, but we do get reasonable technology in the base model. You can actually get autonomous emergency braking standard in the base Frontier. The rest of the active safety suite is optional, but you can get things like adaptive cruise control, lane centering, blind spot monitoring, etc., all in the base Frontier if you want it. 2024 is also going to bring us a new Ford Ranger. Hopefully I'll be driving that early next year, but be prepared to pay more because the Ranger is actually going to be a bit more expensive than the Tacoma, believe it or not. You do get more power because you get a standard 2.3-liter turbo producing 270 horsepower, 310 pound-feet of torque, and you get more engine options because there's also going to be a 2.7-liter twin-turbo V6 making 315 horsepower or a 3-liter twin-turbo 6 producing 405 horsepower. I am pretty surprised that Ford has decided to bring 3 different engines for this truck, even though there's only the one body style that's coming to the US. On the inside, the Ranger also has bigger LCDs. So we have a large standard instrument cluster and then approximately 11-inch tablet-style computer in the middle of the dashboard. We also have pretty high towing ratings. They're saying it's going to be able to tow up to 7,500 pounds. That's a pretty healthy 1,000-pound bump over the best rating that we find in the Tacoma. But then there is that price tag. It's going to be more expensive. It's going to start at $32,565. If you want four-wheel drive, that's $3,645 extra. So that option's actually more expensive than average in this segment. Pricing details for the optional 2.7-liter engine are a little bit unclear at the moment, but we know it's going to be offered in the XLT and the Lariat trim. We also know that there's going to be a Raptor version of the Ranger. So Ranger Raptor sounds kind of fun, actually, but we already know the price tag on that one. It's $55,365, no hybrid system on board. But you are going to get the smoothness and the extra power from that 3-liter twin-turbo 6. So instead of producing maximum power and then at some point when the battery's depleted, you drop down to whatever the 2.4-liter turbo in the Tacoma is giving you, in the Ranger Raptor, you're always going to get that over 400 horsepower from that engine. Next up, we have the Honda Ridgeline, perhaps the most interesting and unusual entry in this segment, because it's the least truck-like, I guess you could say, but perhaps the most pragmatic. It is essentially, at its core, a last-generation Honda Pilot pickup truck. And that last-generation part is important, because even though we know that there's going to be a 2024 Ridgeline, we also know it's not going to be a new Ridgeline. So expect that to be priced around $39,000 to $39,500 or so, decently expensive for a base model in this segment. But also know that it's not going to tow anymore. It's going to top out at around 5,000 pounds. and it's not going to be any different than we have seen recently. So we still get the 3.5-liter V6, still produces 280 horsepower, and it still has the same torque vectoring all-wheel drive system that we find in the Pilot. Yes, this is the only option in this segment that's going to feature torque vectoring, and it's the only option in this segment currently that's going to feature full-time all-wheel drive in the way that you experience in a crossover or SUV. Now, not everybody is going to be interested in that style of system because it's also not going to offer a 2-speed transfer case, any sort of firm locking differential, nothing like that is going to go on in the Ridgeline. On the other hand, it is going to give you fantastic driving dynamics. It's definitely the best handling and the best driving truck in this segment, but it's also the least truck-like in some ways. The interior is definitely roomy in the Ridgeline, even though it doesn't appear that it's any wider than the competition. In reality, the second row is definitely roomier than most of the competitors. On the other hand, it's probably going to be about $2,500 to $3,000 more expensive than a lot of the competition as far as the base price goes, because it does have a lot of standard feature content. And Honda just decided not to make a stripped down version the way that some of the other car companies do. We don't have final pricing details on the Ridgeline yet, but expect that to come sometime in spring of 2024. Next up, we have the Colorado and Canyon Twinsies. These are notably less expensive. I should say the Colorado is notably less expensive. $29,200 for the work truck rear-wheel drive version. Like we see in the Tacoma lineup, GM offers a reduced power version of the base engine. So you're going to get a 2.7-liter turbo in all Colorados and Canyons, but the power output levels are going to vary based on the trim you're in. The base model is going to give you 237 horsepower, 260 pound-feet of torque. The next step up from there is 310 horsepower, 391 pound-feet of torque, and then 391 horsepower, 430 pound-feet of torque. So pretty healthy and torquey in the more off-road versions. Like the other trucks, there's just the one body format, short bed, big cab behind. Like the other options, there's just one body style available, and that would be big cab, short bed behind. Towing figures come in at the top of this segment, actually tying with the Gladiator at 7,700 pounds maximum. So if you want a mid-sized truck that will tow heavier weights, you probably want to take a look at the Colorado or the Canyon. Price-wise, the Z71 is a solid alternative to the TRD off-road that we see currently on sale in the Tacoma lineup. It's going to be about $39,900 for the Chevy, so definitely a little bit less expensive. You're probably going to get a better deal on it on the dealer lot. Since I haven't driven the TRD Pro or the new Trail Hunter model yet, I'm going to reserve judgment until I can get my hands on those, but I would suspect that the TRD Pro is probably going to be the equal of the ZR2, the AT4X, and perhaps even some versions of the Jeep Gladiator. And speaking of Gladiator, let's just breeze right past this one because it's a very different vehicle. It starts at $39,620. That's pretty expensive. And if you get all of the options on it at the moment, and we only know 2023 pricing today, it will get up to about $78,000. So expect it to start north of $40,000 for 2024. It's only going to have the 3.6-liter V6. The diesel engine is dead. For some reason, the 2-liter turbo and the plug-in hybrid have never made it to the Gladiator, so it is a relatively limited drivetrain set on this vehicle, but there are a lot of trims and there are a lot of options. So if you want various different tops, if you want to take your top off, fold your windshield down, take your doors off, etc., this is the truck in the segment for you. But be prepared to pay for that because the Gladiator is going to be more expensive to keep around. It's also going to be more expensive to buy. And so that just puts it in a very different segment. Yes, it does have a pretty healthy tow rating. It does have a relatively roomy cabin. But because it's essentially based on a Wrangler, sort of Wrangler blended with Ram 1500, oddly enough, but the body is actually kind of small for this segment. So the bench in the back is definitely narrower than average. It's a lot less practical for carrying anything more than 4 adults around in, but the bed is pretty practical in the rear. Bottom line, at least for the moment, I think Toyota did exactly what they needed to do with the Tacoma to keep it competitive. We still have those body styles that are not available in the competition, outside the Nissan Frontier, of course. We still have that promise of Toyota reliability and Toyota dependability. We don't know how that will translate to the new turbocharged engine, but remember, this is not an overly stressed turbo, so I wouldn't see any problems with this lasting several 100,000 miles based on its general design. Only time will tell, however. But I can bet that it's probably going to be more durable and more reliable long-term than some of the other competitive turbos that we find in this segment. And each of the entries in this segment have some things that are a bit controversial about them. Of course, the GM truck lineup is all turbo as well. The Honda truck is questionably a truck, by some people's standards. I don't mind calling it that, but some people do. The ZF 9-speed automatic in the Honda is a bit more of a liability for some shoppers. We, of course, have the Jeep Gladiator and the promise of Jeep unreliability or reliability, whatever you want to call it. That can be a red flag for some shoppers out there. And then we have the bare-bones nature of the Nissan Frontier. I will say, though, that if I were shopping for a base truck in this segment, the Frontier is probably how I would go. It is an honest-to-goodness solid work truck. You can get a lot more power out of it, decent towing and hauling ability in the base version, and that V6 is absolutely fantastic. So base SR trim to base Frontier, I would probably go with the Frontier. You're going to get significantly more power, a naturally aspirated V6, you're going to get an extra gear, etc. If you want a manual transmission, you only have two options, basically. It's going to be Gladiator or it's going to be Tacoma. The Tacoma is not the first midsize truck to use coil springs. We find them in the Gladiator as well, but for kind of a different reason and to a different effect. The Gladiator does not ride quite as well as the coil-sprung Tacoma, but the Gladiator also has more of an off-road mission. So from the factory, you can get pretty darn big tires. It's more off-road oriented as far as the general suspension design and general design of the vehicle, and that's going to impact its ride quality on the road. The Tacoma is more of a traditional on-road truck, at least for most of the formats that we've driven so far. Again, keep in mind we do have the off-road Pro, we have the off-road TRD off-road model, we have the TRD Sport model as well, and the upcoming Trailhunter. So there are certainly going to be off-road focused Tacomas, but there are also on-road focused Tacomas, and we don't really see that in the Gladiator lineup. The Gladiator lineup is pretty darn skewed towards the off-road community and off-road suspension tuning. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below, and what would your choice be if you were shopping for a mid-size truck in North America today? Again, I would say base truck format, I might lean Nissan Frontier, but for the rest of the lineup, I would probably be solidly Team Tacoma, unless you really wanted to go further off the beaten path, take things to the next level. Then I might say a Jeep Gladiator is worth a look. Just keep in mind that with those more complex off-road systems is going to come the promise or unpromise of Jeep reliability, however you want to look at that. Let me know down there. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and stay tuned because hopefully I'll have a Tacoma at home to run it through our usual battery tests just as soon as possible. See all of you next week.